welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about backing. We're going to talk about loading the quilt and what it takes to do the backing part. So when you have a quilt, you order yardage from the fabric store and it comes in a big pile, and sometimes it's a little bit daunting with what to do with all this fabric. And so I'm going to show you. So this is a client that has sent me their quilt top, which is beautiful. And it's the American Gatherings flag. Lisa Bongean did a sew along, and I'll link it down below in case you want to make it too. But the client sent me yardage, and so I'm going to piece the backing for her. And a lot of times, because I live near Austin, Texas, a lot of times people will send me their quilt tops and then they'll just order their backing and have it delivered directly to me. And then I piece it for them and load it. And so this is what happens when someone sends me yardage. So it arrives and it's a big bunch of fabric. And so this particular fabric has words on it. So it says Old Glory on it. So it's directional, which means if you run it like this, it's going to be upside down or sideways. And so we have to figure out how to put it on here and make it the correct size and still have the letters going the right way and all of those things. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my tape measure out and I'm going to measure this quilt. So this quilt width-wise, so I have it laying on my long arm. The top's over there and the bottom's down here. So the width-wise, and I always leave my tape measure over just a smidge. So width-wise, it's about 68.5. So now it's like I take notes and I write down that it's 68.5 on my paper. And so the other part, so now we're gonna take this quilt, and so I'm gonna put it the other way. So this is the top. The top is right here on this side, and the bottom of the quilt is down here. And so what we need to do is measure it this way so that I know the dimensions this way, and I've already done that. It is 72. So I know that the quilt is 68 by 72, but I'm not gonna get caught up in a bunch of math. So I don't really like math, I never have. And so everything I do is to avoid math at all costs. Okay, so, and the reason why I measure it this way is because I'm trying to determine how long the quilt is. Because when you're sewing yardage together, when you get your yardage, this is what it looks like. And so I just pull it apart, and so it's folded in half. So there's the salvage end right here on the top, and then it's folded. And so when it opens up, this amount right here, when it opens up, so when it's folded in half, the way that it comes from the store, it's about 22 inches of usable fabric. So that means 44, double that, is what you have. So if you're gonna sew one piece, and then let's just use the other end just to show. And so the other side is another 44 inches. So if we sew two pieces together, a 44 and another 44, that's going to equal 88. And so we know that number is smaller than 72. So our quilt was 72 inches. We want a little bit on the top and a little bit on the bottom of your backing so that you can load it and have enough room for the pins. So what I always do is I determine if I have to do one seam in the middle or two seams in the middle, because if it's a really long quilt, then you'll have to do one piece, another piece, and then another piece, and you'll have to stitch the salvage edges together so that you can make one long piece. And so when you're looking at it, you'll have the piece here and there's a seam, and then another piece and there's a seam and another piece. So it's 3 pieces stacked, making it tall enough to accommodate your quilt size. And so since this one's only 72, I know that 2 pieces is plenty. And so really that's the only math that I do, is I just make sure that the two pieces sewn together is enough to accommodate the length of the quilt. And so that's what I do. So now I know I only need to do two pieces. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the quilt the other way. So now it's going the correct direction. And again, no measuring. I'm gonna take the end of my fabric, and you can leave it folded. It's a little bit easier. I just unfolded it just to show. So just for bulk sakes, it's a little bit easier to leave it folded. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lay it out on my long arm. And if you don't have a long arm at home, just lay it out on the floor. So lay your quilt out on the floor. And what I usually do is give myself about this much extra. I don't really measure. I give myself about that much extra off the side. And I lay it down. And I leave about that same amount extra on this side. And then I fold it over. And I go back over. And when I get back to this starting point right here, I make a little snip with my scissors and I cut or I rip it so that it's the same length. And it doesn't even have to be exactly the same length, because these are the side seams, and as a long arm quilter, I don't really care if the side seams, if one side is just a little bit longer, it doesn't matter to me. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my scissors, and like I said, I'm just gonna chop it right where the other one is. And I'm gonna rip it. And so now I line up the two ends and I pull it back so that I know this end is the other end. And then I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna cut it and I'm gonna rip it. So now what we wanna do is we want to make sure, if your fabric is directional, you just wanna make sure that you're putting them both the correct way so that you don't have one going up and down and one going the other way. Because depending on what kind of fabric you're using, just pay attention to the pattern that's on it. So this fabric it says Old Glory on it, and it's going this way, the correct way right here, but then underneath it, it's upside down. So it says Old Glory both directions, so it doesn't really matter as long as it's not going up and down. So what we're gonna do then is we're going to just join the two sides, and remember to do good side to good side, because you don't want to, so we're gonna take the two selvage edges, and we're gonna line them up. And so there I have the two pieces, and they're good side to good side. And then what I do is I always do make sure that I open it up before I stitch it and make sure that it looks the correct way, so that it looks the way that you want it to look, and it does. And so now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to just go stitch these two pieces together. And I don't pin or anything, I just stitch them together. I use about 1.5 inch stitch length. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put it on the machine, and I use this edge. I usually just put this edge because I'm gonna fold it and press it open. And so I usually just stitch in about 1/2 inch or so, maybe even 3/4 inch from the very edge in. And I just follow the lines on my machine to make sure that my stitches are going to be straight, all the way across. And so we're gonna do that part, and then I'll show you how to load it. Okay, we're at the machine, and we've got our good side to good side, just how we had it. There are salvages going right here, and I'm gonna put it on my machine. I'm gonna line it up, like I said a second ago, right about at the 1/2 inch mark on my machine plate. And I have my stitch length about 1.5, 1.8, something like that. I don't think I have my machine. There we go. Okay, and so I'm gonna back stitch at the end, and then excuse me, and then I'm just gonna make sure I keep my edges together and try to keep that right at my half inch mark, and just go straight down. Okay, so I'm all finished. Remember I told you sometimes they're not exactly the same. This one's about a half an inch longer, maybe an inch longer than the other one, and that's okay because it's going to be on the side of the long arm, and I don't really care about that. So now we are going to go and what we need to do is fold it open and press it. And some people will trim it off. I see a lot of different kinds of backings. A lot of people trim them off so that they're only 1/4 of an inch. Some people leave them like that. I usually just leave them. Unless, the reason why I would trim them is if it's a white fabric and has you know, like dark spots or something on it, and so the selvage has the little black dots on it. I would maybe trim it off that way, because if it's folded and pressed open and it's a lighter colored fabric, sometimes you would be able to see through the other side those dots, and so that's probably the only reason why I would trim it off. So I'm gonna go press it flat, and then we're gonna load it. Okay, so we have it all ironed, and it looks really good. So you can barely see the seam. And I have it pressed, nice and flat. And so what I do anytime that I load a quilt, I always make sure that the backing is cut correctly and it's the right size before I load it. Because I have seen a couple of times that the quilt back, they're just a human error and we make a mistake and then we gotta fix it. So I always check it out first. So what I do is I lay out the quilt back, make it flat, then I lay out the quilt top the way that it is supposed to go. And so this client has put a little post-it note on the top to let me know this is the top. That is always very helpful. And so typically I try to line up the seam that we just sewed with the halfway point of the quilt. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 there's 5 rows. So I'm gonna have it be somewhere in this center row. So I've got plenty of space down here on the bottom, and then I'm gonna walk around and make sure that there's plenty of extra on the top, and there is. And so now I know that it's gonna fit and everything's perfect, and so I can start loading it. So that just, that's just how I've always done my backings that way. Even before I got my long arm, I've always laid my fronts down on the floor and just pulled out my yardage and then folded it back over and then sewed the 2 seams together. And sometimes you sew 3 seams together, but I don't do a lot of ironing. I am losing my mind, y'all. I don't do a lot of measuring. So anyway, that's how we're gonna do it. And so I'm gonna go ahead and load this guy right now and start quilting it. enjoyed this video, I would love for you to hit subscribe. This is a new channel, and down on the bottom in the description I also put a link to my website. I am a long arm quilter full-time, so I would love for you to mail me your quilts too. And I hope that you have a fabulous day. Thanks for watching.